Lunch Money by Andrew Clements. Chapter 1. Talent. Greg Kitten had heaps of talent. He was good at baseball and even better at soccer. He had a clear singing voice, and he also played the piano. He was a whiz at sketching and drawing, and he did well at school. Reading, science, music, writing, art, math, gym, social studies, the whole deal. But as good as he was at all these things, Greg's greatest talent had always been money. Greg had never taken money lessons. He hadn't had a money tutor or gone to money camp. His talent with money was natural. He had always understood money. He knew how to save it, knew how to keep track of it, how to grow it, and most of all, how to make it. It takes some kids years and years to figure out that everything is worth something. Not Greg. Sitting in a grocery cart by the door of the supermarket, he had watched with sharp brown eyes as his mom dropped a small metal disc into a red machine. Then she'd turn the crank, and a handful of M&Ms had rattled out into her hand. Greg loved the sweet, crunchy taste, but it wasn't the candy that had captured his imagination. It was the shiny silver coin. While he was still a skinny preschooler with his curly brown hair, Greg had learned to keep his eyes and ears open. One day at breakfast, his biggest brother, Ross, griped, "How come I have to make my bed? I'm just going to mess it up again tonight." His other big brother, Edward, chimed in, "And cleaning up our rooms every single morning? That's not fair. Besides, there are rooms." His mom had answered, "Yes, but your rooms are in my house, and I like my house tidy. So if you want to keep getting your allowances every Friday, get back upstairs and fix the mess." Ross and Edward had grumbled all the way back to their rooms. Their little brother followed them, and 2 minutes later, Greg had started a housekeeping business. Making a bed, 10 cents. Putting dirty clothes in the laundry, 5 cents. Putting clean clothes away, 2 cents. And hanging up used towels, 3 cents each. If both his big brothers were complete slobs, and they usually were, Greg earned a little more than $2 a week. So it was certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme. But that wasn't what Greg was trying to do. He was perfectly happy to get rich slowly, because being patient is a big part of having money talent. Greg understood that a year has 52 weeks. So between the ages of 4 and 6, Greg transformed rumpled sheets, used underwear, smelly socks, and soggy towels into beautiful, spendable cash. More than $200. Then his mom shut down his business, insisting that Ross and Edward had to do their own chores. When he was still in nursery school, Greg had taken charge of recycling the family's trash. He emptied all the waste baskets at least once a week. At the bins out in the garage, he sorted the newspapers and magazines from the cardboard, the aluminum from the steel, and the 1 plastic from the 2 plastic. As a reward for his service, which took him only 10 minutes a week, Greg was allowed to keep the deposit funds on all the cans and bottles. This added up to about $4 a month in the cool seasons and $8 a month during the long, thirsty summer. As a 7- and 8-year-old, Greg had found other ways to make money around the house and yard. He shined his dad's and mom's dress shoes for 50 cents a pair. He scrubbed black heel marks and old wax off the floor tiles in the kitchen for 10 cents a square. He dug dandelions out of the lawn at the rate of 4 for a nickel. And he picked Japanese beetles off the shrubs for a penny a bug. At first, Greg enjoyed simply having the money he made. Cash was fun and interesting all by itself. He liked sorting and stacking the bills, singles, 5s, 10s, 20s, and even a few 50s he'd gotten from his grandparents for Christmas. He studied the faces of the famous presidents, and Alexander Hamilton, too, who he discovered was never president, only the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States. He looked at the engraving on the bills with a magnifying glass, studying the tiny face of Lincoln sitting there on his big square chair inside the Lincoln Memorial on the back of every $5 bill. Greg found the coins just as interesting. He loved making rolls of quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, stacks and stacks of them. And the gold Sacagawea dollar coins? He didn't put them into rolls. He had collected 27 of them, which he kept hidden in the sock in the bottom drawer of his dresser. Every once in a while, he'd spread them out on his bed and count them again. Greg also became an amateur coin collector. It was exciting to come up with a mercury dime now and then, and he'd found a couple dozen of those gray pennies that had been made out of steel instead of copper during the Second World War. He had found pennies that were worth $10 or more, and that can get a kid thinking. As nice as it was to have the money itself, Greg quickly learned it was also fun to spend some now and then. He would spend it for something special, like his own professional quality soccer ball, or one of those huge aluminum flashlights with 6 batteries that could throw a beam of light all the way across the lake at his grandpa's cabin. He bought cool stuff that he really wanted, and mostly when it seemed too long a wait until his birthday or Christmas. He bought collectible baseball cards, and he also had a few Beanie Babies, and then sold them for a nice profit. Sometimes he bought comic books, but only a few, and only ones that looked like they would become more valuable. Greg loved comics, but he got to read all he wanted for free because his dad collected them. By the time he got to grade 3, Greg had set himself a goal. He wanted to be rich. He thought it would be fantastic to be able to spend all the money he wanted anytime he felt like it. If he wanted to get the world's fastest computer plus 100 of the best games, no problem. If he wanted a car, a speedboat, a house in the mountains, a home theater system, or even a whole island out in the middle of the Pacific, plus his own seaplane and a private crew to fly him there, no problem. Greg was sure that someday he'd be able to get anything he wanted, and all he'd need was money. And he wasn't that different from his friends. A lot of them also dreamed about getting rich, and some of them wanted to be famous too. Greg didn't care much about fame. What was the point? Besides, he figured that if he got rich enough, really super rich, then the famous part would happen automatically anyway. But there was one big difference between Greg and most of his friends. He wasn't just dreaming about getting rich, he was working at it. As Greg reached 3rd grade and then 4th, his whole neighborhood had become the land of opportunity. He was thin but wiry, and strong enough to tackle any job he put his mind to. Greg raked and bagged leaves in the fall and again in the spring. He washed cars all spring, summer, and fall, and on hot days he sold lemonade. He shoveled snow and salted icy sidewalks in the winter. Greg became a feeder of cats, a walker of dogs, and a collector of mail and newspapers for people on vacation. He swept garages and straightened up messy basements. If people ever decided to throw things away, Greg kept the good stuff for himself and hauled it home in his own little corner of the Kenton family garage. And when he had collected enough interesting junk, Greg would drag it all out to the end of the driveway, put up a sign, and hold a sale. Neighborhood money filled Greg's pockets in the way rain fills puddles. For example, consider what Greg earned just from shoveling snow. He had 8 customers within 2 blocks of his house, and every time it snowed, he shoveled their front walks for a flat rate, $10. The winter of his 3rd grade year, it snowed 6 times, and the winter of his 4th grade year, it snowed 5 times. And 11 snowfalls times 8 customers equals 88 shovel sessions times $10 for each one equals $880, which isn't just a lot of money to a 9-year-old. $880 is a lot of money to anybody. It hadn't taken Greg long to become the family banker. If his mom and dad were running late for a movie on a Saturday night, Greg was happy to lend them $20, as long as they signed his little record book and promised to repay the money. And his parents got special treatment. They didn't have to pay Greg's usual lending fees. After all, they didn't charge him for the food he ate or for the safe, warm bed he slept in every night, so that seemed fair. But his 2 brothers had to pay the regular rates. If his older brother needed an extra $5 to get the new baseball glove in time to break it in before the Babe Ruth tryouts, Greg was happy to lend him the money, as long as Edward signed the book and promised to pay back the $5 1 week later, plus a 50-cent fee. And Greg got the old mitt as part of the deal, because a used baseball glove might be worth something at his next driveway sale. And if Ross just had to have the hot new CD the instant it arrived at the music store, he knew his little brother would be happy to help, for a fee. Both Ross and Edward made fun of Greg's money-making schemes. They called him Scrooge and Mr. Cashman and Old Moneybags and some other nicknames too. Still, whenever they needed money, they knew they would always be welcome at the First Family Bank of Greg. One Thursday, shortly after Greg had finished 4th grade, his dad pulled a reference book off a shelf next to the computer in the family room. Along with the information he'd been looking for, he also found 12 $5 bills tucked between the pages. Only one person in the family could have owned that money, so at bedtime that night, he told Greg that he'd found it. Greg sat up straight in bed. "You put it all back, right?" His dad said, "Absolutely. But how about we go to the bank on Saturday morning and open up a savings account? That's where your money belongs." Greg had looked at him suspiciously. "Why?" "Because your money will be safer at the bank, and it'll be there when you need it, like when you go to college." Greg said, "But I can get my money out before then? Like if I see something I need at a yard sale?" His dad nodded. "You're allowed to get your money any time you want. But if you take the money out of the bank, then the money won't grow." "Grow?" said Greg. "You mean earn interest, right?" A little surprised, his dad had nodded and said, "Right, earn interest. If you put $100 in the bank and leave it there for 1 year, the bank will add $5 more to it. So then you'll have $105. That's called earning 5% interest a year. And all the money has to do is sit there. Pretty neat, huh?" Greg thought about that. "So my money just sits there?" His dad said, "Well, actually, the bank will probably lend your money to other people, and then those people will pay the bank interest for being able to use it, just like the bank pays you that $5 of interest so that it can use your money." Greg said, "And I only get $5 if I let the bank use my $100 for a whole year? That stinks, because if I spend $2 on lemon juice and sugar and paper cups, and if I sell 30 cups of lemonade this weekend, then in 1 weekend I'll make more money than the bank would pay me all year." "That's true," his dad said. "Making your own business investments is a way to earn more money faster, as long as you make good investments. But if you keep hiding money around the house, it could get lost or stolen." "But what about your comic books?" Greg asked. "You keep your whole collection right here in the house." His dad nodded. "True, but I've got an insurance policy on them, and a special policy on the most valuable ones. And if something happened to my comics, the insurance company would pay me back the money they're worth. But you can't get an insurance policy on money itself, unless you keep it in a bank. So if our house burned down, you'd have no money at all, none, and you'd get nothing back." That got Greg's attention. The next day, Greg had retrieved money from about 30 different hiding places around the house and yard and garage. And on Saturday morning, he'd gone to the bank and opened his own savings account with a first deposit that amazed his dad. More than $3,200. And that wasn't even all of Greg's money, just most of it. He'd kept a couple $100 at home, because Greg already understood that sometimes a business person needs money right away. By age 11, he was well on his way to success, always on the lookout for new money-making opportunities. And then one day, Greg Kenton made the greatest financial discovery of his young life.